What an honor to be here this morning and share with you this morning. The other thing I want to tell you is one of the ministries that I get the privilege of serving in, and that's Celebrate Recovery. And we meet here every single Friday night. And I just want to tell you some amazing things that happened Friday night. Friday night was, for me, was an awe night. It was one of those nights where I went away and said, God, we could not do this without your help. We could not do the changes. And there's this lady who came to us, and she plays the violin. And she shared that when she was a young girl playing it, her dad said to her, I wish for you to play the violin so people can worship the Lord. And that was the dream of her dad. And she wanted to always fulfill her dad's dream, but because of her fears, she was unable to. And she came here, and she has a great teacher in Kimwell who's been teaching her and walking with her with the violin, and her dad passed. And I remember her sharing with me, I was not able to play this so my dad can see his vision come true. And Friday night, that vision of her dad came true. And we got a great team. Diana, who was up here this morning leading us in worship, she invited her to be a part of her team, and she played the violin. And it wasn't that she was the background music and the background of the violin. Everyone else was quiet as she was playing her violin. And I just sat there and watched her gleam and shine as she's playing this violin. And I just knew that her dad was in heaven smiling, saying, I knew she was going to lead people in worship playing the violin. And I just knew that this was going to happen. And it was an amazing time. And then we had another young lady who has had a real tough life. Real strong, tough life. And she came to us about a year ago. She decided she's a person who loves to work with her hands. She just loves building things and doing things. And she went to trade school to get trade so that she could work. And she wanted to work with metal. She wanted to work with welders. She wanted to work with machinery. That's what she wanted to do. And she was the top third of her class. And out of that, the instructor said always the top three are chosen. There's companies come in here and choose our top three consistently over and over. But she was a woman, and she wasn't chosen. And she had a tough time with not getting a job. And she went and she applied to many places. And she would say to me, I keep getting the same. They don't think a woman could be doing this job. And then this one company this week said, we want to have you come and work with us. We don't work with big metals, but we work with tin, and we work with this, and will you come and work? And so she worked. Wednesday was her first day, and then after it was over, her boss came to her and said, and how was your day? Thinking she was going to be saying, I don't like running up and down ladders, I don't like banging tin, it's a hard work. And she said, I just love what I'm doing. And he kind of looked at her like, what? She said, I love working with my hands. I've never worked with this kind of a metal, but I just love doing it. And if I'm going to have to bang tin all my life, then I'm going to bang tin because I just love doing this. And the boss looked at her and said, we got the best person for the job here. And so God is doing amazing things on Friday night. People's lives are changing, and I would love to have you come out. We meet every single Friday night. Well, I've been blessed with giving you the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus taught us, and it feels like forever that we've been in the Sermon on the Mount, but because there's so much in there, my life has changed because we took the time as a church and just really focused in on what was Jesus telling us, how was Jesus walking with us. And I'm bringing Matthew 5:43 to 48. It says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what good are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. God's got a lot. Jesus wanted us to know a lot was in here. There's a lot of little pieces, and he first of all wants to tell us this is how the world sees things. He tells us, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I don't know about you, but I've had many of my friends, when I go to them and say, oh, so-and-so I just had this circumstance and this guy just hurt me. Many of my friends who do not know Jesus have said, just leave him alone. I wouldn't talk to him anymore. Turn your back on him. You know, Cheryl and I have been blessed, and we've taken in people into our homes, and we only have 2 rules. No alcohol, no drugs in our house. More than welcome to stay with us, but there's no alcohol and drugs. And this one gentleman who was staying with us, and he had been with us for about 4 months, and he started using crack cocaine again. And our rule is that if you're using crack cocaine, you can't live with us. And until you want to give it away, stop it, then we'll have you come back. And anyways, he got really indignant. He got really upset with me. He got really mad with me. He started telling me I can't throw him out. He's going to stay here forever. And a lot of stuff. And I said, no, you're out. And out he went. And he then phoned the police on me. And the police officer called me and said, you know, under the laws of renters, you can't do what you're doing. And I said, yes, I can. You don't understand what you're talking about. And me and the officer had a little argument, and it really started getting ugly. And then the fella phoned me and said, I'm going to be coming, I'm going to be kicking your door in. And it got really stupid. I could have just said, wash my hands and say, I'm done. Because that's what the world tells us to do. Turn our back on the ones who don't and oppose us. Turn away from those ones who are not liking us. But you see, God tells us to do something different. I remember I phoned the rentals board, and they said, no, you're right, and they gave me the section I was right under. I was able to phone the police officer back, who was really mad at me the night before, and show him on there. I said, no, this is where it is under the law, and I am fully right with what I'm doing. And he said, he said to me, I learned something new, and he apologized to me. He said, I'm sorry that I was so angry with you last night. And I said to him, I understand your position when you don't understand the full law. We can get to this place. But you know, I know that God calls us to be something different. He calls us to be different people. He wants us to look at things differently. He doesn't want us to say, hey, this is my enemy, and I don't want to talk to him anymore. He's hurt me, he's said some things to me, I'm just done. That's what the world. I've been at work sites where someone has said something to someone and they are just totally no longer doing it. I've been on a job site where I work in a union job site, and normally seniority wins. But once in a while, a supervisor will overjump seniority and give a position to someone way junior. And if someone has been waiting for that job, and then all of a sudden it goes to a junior person, I've seen that person turn completely bitter on the job site. They've come from being a great worker to being one of the worst workers ever on the job site. Just because we got things a little bit different in the world. We have things where we start looking at it because it tells us to love our neighbor but hate our enemy. It's easy to do. It's harder to take the next piece that God calls us to do. I want to tell you, Pastor Paul told me 2 weeks ago, you're going to be preaching on this. And I said, great, thank you. I love having preparation time. I just love it. So every morning I'm going to be reading this. My devotional time, I take an hour every morning. My devotional time, I'm going to read this. And I want to tell you, I got to this line. It says, but I tell you. And I stopped, what? And I read it again. Jesus is saying, but I tell you. He's telling us to stop and listen for a minute. That no matter what else is happening in our life, I want to tell you something, to live a different way, to look at things differently than the way the world is telling you to look at it. He tells us, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. I love this part. He says, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. See, he tells us that we're needing to love our enemies. And not just love them, but he wants us to pray for them. You see, that man that was all that anger and all that indignant, he was able to call me up and a year later and say, hey, can we go for coffee? And I said, yeah, we can. We're going to meet in a public place somewhere where I have witnesses to how he's going to treat me. I'm thinking smartly. I don't want to meet him privately in case he gets angry again. And we meet in a restaurant and we sit down, and as we're sitting there, because God's calling us to love him. God's telling me I can't be angry with him. God's telling me I need to be praying for him. And as I'm doing it and I'm sitting there, he says, he sat there and he sat down and he said, you know, I was really wrong for what I did. I was way off base. I got mixed up in the drugs again and I lost my way. and I hope that you can forgive me. I want to tell you, I was so grateful that I have learned that Jesus calls me to forgive, no matter what you do to me. And I was so grateful I could sit there and look at him square in the eye and say, I forgive you, but greater, Jesus forgives you. And we were able to talk about all the stuff that happened. We were able to do everything. And then we were able to shake, hug. And I just knew there was something that he was wanting to say something more. And I just felt in my spirit there was something he hadn't done. But it's not my job to get it out of him. But I just sat there with him. And he said, you're just sitting. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, you know there's something more, don't you? And I said, I thought there was. And he said, I want to ask, can I come back to Celebrate Recovery? And I was so grateful that I could say, no, you can not just come back, but man, I know the abilities that you have. I want to use your abilities that God has given you to be better at Celebrate Recovery. Use your gifts to help us out. Unfortunately, he hasn't chosen to come, but man, I was so grateful that I was able to tell him, this is how God calls us to act, and I can act that way. I want to tell you, Jesus tells us consistently where the benchmark is of how we need to be. I love the fact that the day that Jesus was crucified, he showed us how we need to act towards our enemy. You know, he was arrested. He was brought before the judge of the Romans of the time. He was persecuted. He was ridiculed. He was made fun of. He was then whipped and flogged, and he was spit on. They put a crown on his head. They made him carry his cross until he no longer could carry it anymore. And they made him go all the way up, and then they nailed him to the cross. But you see, Jesus still told us how we're to love our enemy. Because there were standing underneath his cross, gambling for his clothes. And it would have been easy, and I want to say, if Jesus would have said, die, I wish that you would die, I would understand that from what he had gone through. But then he said something completely different that I had to take a look and say, this is how he wants me to be. He says to them, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You see, these are the men who had just done all that to him, and he's asking his heavenly Father to forgive him. He's showing mercy. He's showing me, this is how I need to act. This is how I need to do. This is how I need to be, is be like Jesus. I'm called to be like Jesus. And so when I'm being persecuted and lied about, and I'm being all these things that are happening, I'm still called to ask God to forgive them. I'm still called to ask God to show him your love. I'm not called to say, get out of my life, get lost. You see, I love Jesus. He's still on this cross, but he has two other people. They're crucified behind him, and they were criminals of the time. And in the laws of that time, we would say they deserved to be hanging there. But Jesus, he didn't. But one of them recognized who Jesus was as he was on the cross. He recognized that, he knew that who he was. He said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your heaven, your kingdom. He wanted him to know that he was going he knew he was going somewhere. And he wanted Jesus to remember him, although he was dying as Jesus was. And then I love Jesus' heart. I just love this. He says, truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. He made sure that the criminals, the ones who were deserving to be on there, knew that they were going to be with him in paradise. He wanted them to know that they were forgiven for everything they'd done. They were no longer bound by the guilt and the shame and the remorse. I want to tell you, I had a man who was very, very close to me. We spent 16 to 17 years together. We were both in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we both gave a lot of service to it. I was asked, and we were together asked all over this province. We drove all over BC. Speaking, teaching, being what we were called to do. And we spent a lot of time, we shared our lives together. He was one who, when he said to me, just you need to pray for someone, and I was only 5 years sober, he said, just need to pray for this person who had hurt me. And it was quiet on my end. He said, "Where are you, Bruce?" And I said, "I'm here." He said, "You don't pray, do you?" And I said, "No." And then he taught me how to pray. He taught me how to, when I had the door closed against God and any idea of God, he was the one who said, "You know what, we need to open that door just a little bit, just to let God in. And how we're going to do this is we're just going to let it in." And he walked me opening that door to Jesus. He was there with me and wanted to show me all this stuff. He was with me, and he was one of my biggest supporters. And I was one of his biggest supporters. Whatever he was doing, I was behind him. And I was doing it. And then all of a sudden, Cheryl and I were looking at making a career change. We were running a house, a Christian recovery house. And we were doing well. We were doing fantastic at it. We had a staff, and we doing really good. We actually had 100 men come through. And in the year and a half that we were together, 100 men. And 39 of them were still sober. And most of them were over a year sober. Most of them had changed their lives. And we were looking at these stats, and these were fabulous stats that we were doing well with. And then all of a sudden, something happened to my friend. He was on the board of directors of that house, and he was my biggest supporter. But all of a sudden, he started meeting privately with my staff. And then he started meeting privately with the board. And then rumors started to come flying out that were not true rumors, and things were starting to swirl very, 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 very quickly. And then the board decided they're going to have this meeting. And Cheryl and I called it the kangaroo court. They were having this meeting to confront Cheryl and I and what was going on. And we stood there, and then they started asking me questions. And I would say, "Yeah, that was my behavior, but that was many years ago. I went for counseling for that, and that's been changed." "Yes, but we're hearing you're doing it now." I said, "Well, that's wrong." And then they would say, "Oh, what about this?" And I'd say, "You're wrong." "What about this?" And "You're wrong." And everything they were asking me was wrong, but they were taking it as the truth. Very, very quickly, by the end of that day, they told Cheryl and I we were no longer welcome in the home. We were no longer welcome to do what we thought we were called to do. God called us to do this. And we really believed that God was calling us to do this. And it really became ugly. And that man who was my biggest supporter, I phoned him and said, "What's going on?" "I want to tell you, it got really ugly between us. I called him a liar. He called me a liar. We did some things, and I just said, 'I'm done with you.' And we ended it. And I was at this place, forget my enemy." But I want to tell you, I was part of this church. And one of the things about me is when I say I'm going to do it, I do it. And one of the things I was asked is cut the grass. And there was 5 of us that year that were cutting the grass on a 5-week rotation. And every one of them called me their week to cut the grass and said, "I can't do it anymore. Can you cut the grass for me?" And because I say yes, I don't know how to say no very often. Yeah, okay, I'll do it. But I want to tell you, I was angry. I was mad. I was hurt. I thought, really, do I want to continue walking down this path? And this was a board of Christians. I said, if I really want to be a Christian, look at the way they acted towards me. But I get on that tractor, and I'd yell at God. I want to tell you, I'm hanging on that tractor. I'm yelling out there. And we have some great pastors here. Pastor Irv, he would call me over, and I'd come driving up to the front of the church. And he'd say, "You know, God loves you. I just see you out there praying. I just know God loves you so much." And I'd say, "Yeah," I said, "I am talking to God, but I don't know if we're praying." And he says, "Oh, remember, God loves you." And then he'd walked away. And that was what I started thinking about. God loved me. And then Pastor Ruth, who was a real big instrumental in my life at that time, she sat down and she said, "You know, this man is not the enemy." And I said, "Oh, no, you're wrong. He is the enemy." And she said, "No. There is only one enemy, and that's the devil. And the devil is using him. You need to be praying for him. You need to show and find forgiveness for him." And I want to tell you, I cried with her. I said, "How do I find forgiveness for this man, for what he had done, the betrayal of what he had done?" And she said, "You need to find it. You have to find it. If you want to live at peace, you need to find it." Well, I want to tell you, I would still go to AA meetings, and I would go to meetings, and there he was. And I was, where's my heart? Am I upset with him? Am I angry with him? He avoids me. I'm okay with that. He can avoid me all he wants, so I'm not going to not go. And I would sit there, and then eventually I had to get to this place where I remember one night I said to Cheryl, we came to a meeting, and I said, "Oh, there he is." And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yes." She turned to me, "Where do you want to sit?" I said, "Right in the middle. I want to be right in the middle of the room. I don't want to be anywhere else." And I said, "And when he comes walking by me, I'm not going to let him go without putting my hand out and saying hello. I want to be free. I don't want to have the anger towards him. I don't want to be angry any longer. I want him to know that I am free. And that is done with me. Anyways, quick story. We hadn't talked for 4 years. And I work graveyard shift at the school district, and at Friday morning, and we have Celebrate Recovery Friday night. I didn't sleep Fridays. And Friday night at 11 o'clock, I get home, I'm exhausted, and I crash. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, there he is standing at the edge of my bed, waking me up, saying, Bruce, I need to talk to you. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning. I said, what are you doing in my house? He said, I need to ask you a question. I said, I don't care, you need to ask. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Cheryl is laying here beside me. What are you doing? He said, I need to ask you a question. I said, get out of my room. I'll come out and you can ask me there. He said, no, I need to ask you right now. I said, okay, ask me your question. He says, I need to ask you, do you forgive me? I need to ask you to forgive me for what I did. I said, I have forgiven you many years ago. I haven't forgotten what you did, but I have forgiven you for what you've done. He said, thank you. And I want to tell you, I blinked and he was gone. I thought, well, where did he go? I got dressed and I ran around my house. My house was locked up and it's dark. I said, wow, that was an amazing dream. I went to sleep. I told Cheryl my dream in the morning. But 11 o'clock in the morning, I want to tell you, it's like yesterday. 11 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings. It's another friend and we all know each other. He said, I need to tell you something. I said, what's that? 9 o'clock yesterday, our friend passed away. I said, what? He said he passed away. And I told him on the phone, no, he wasn't. He was just in my bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, what? And I told him the story. He said, amazing. This came alive for me. Matthew 5:23 and 24 says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. I believe that he needed to reconcile with me before he could go to heaven. I believe when he got to heaven, they said, is there anything left? And the only reason I believe this is because I went to his funeral. I went to his funeral for 2 reasons. One, to honor his children. I knew both his boys, and I just wanted to honor his 2 boys, and then his sister. I wanted to honor his sister. He really had a relationship with his sister, a really unique one. I wanted to go there and just tell them how much I'm sorry that he's gone, and that I hope that you can find some peace. And as we were sitting there in the funeral, one of the men gets up at close to the end and says, I need to say something today. He was the chairperson of the kangaroo court that Cheryl and I were a part of. And he got up and he said, I want to say this. I'm speaking only to 2 people. I'm speaking to Bruce and Cheryl, who are here this morning. And both of us were sitting there, what? What's he doing? And I'm thinking, oh man, if he starts bringing up this stuff, I'm out of here. And as it goes on, he says, I was with him the morning he passed away. I was with him at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I asked him if there was anything left undone, because he's going to see Jesus very soon. He needs to clear up everything in his life. And his last words were, I need to reconcile with Bruce and Cheryl. I should have called them way before now, because I don't have the time to do it. I really believe that was on his heart. He needed to know that he was clear and free so that he could live at peace with Jesus. We need to know that no matter what's going on, we need to be children of God. God calls us to be his children. And when he calls us to be his children, we need to act like his children. His child is Jesus. That's my benchmark. That's who I need to act like. I need to act like Jesus. No matter what is going on in my life, no matter how bad you mistreated me, no matter what you've said to me and you don't follow through, I still got to act like Jesus. Because that's what Jesus calls me to be a child of the Father. And if I'm going to be a child of the Father, I need to act that way. He goes on to say, is if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. See, he's calling us to be different. Everybody in the world can be friendly to someone who loves them, to someone who likes them. It's really easy when it's someone who likes you, but it's really difficult when you know they have something against you. It's really hard and it's not easy, but that's what God calls us to do, is that when we know that someone has something against us, he calls us to pray for them. As he did when he was on the cross and the men were gambling for his clothes, he was praying for them. He calls us to pray for ours. He calls us to love them no matter what they've done. He calls us to be different. Well, my story is great, but I want to tell you I know someone who has a greater story because I'd never had to see him other than once in a while. But someone who's in their family. I'm going to ask my wife, Cheryl, if you come on up. Pastor Paul, will you grab her a mic? Not so nervous this time? She was really nervous at the first service.
Oh, I'm still nervous.
Okay. So Cheryl, what happened to you when you were a child and how old were you?
At 7 years old, I was sexually abused by my older brother.
And so how did that affect your life?
Well, when I was a child, I would eat. And when I became a teenager early, I started to drink and do drugs.
And how did that affect your relationships?
Well, it didn't because I was still drinking and drugging,
So
hiding the pain.
Hiding the pain.
Yeah.
And so when me and you met, we met clean and sober. How did it affect our relationship?
It affected us intimately.
And so you had many people in the world telling you the only way you're going to be able to deal with this, and how did the world tell you needed to deal with it?
The world told me that I needed to take him to court, charge him, and get financial restitution for the pain and suffering he caused me.
And what did you do to get and deal with it?
Well, I had to forgive him because that's what Jesus calls us to do, to forgive. And by forgiving, I was free from the pain of it.
And so it's your brother. So what does freedom look like?
When we go home to to my family's home, to my hometown, he lives there, and my sister is there, and we take him out for dinner, and we break bread together, and we have conversations, and my heart is free. I'm not angry at him. You know, I've really totally forgiven him. He himself was broken. I don't know what happened, but hurt people always hurt people. And I learned that in Celebrate Recovery. You know, when you're broken, if you don't get healing and forgiveness.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
Thank you. See, this was a brother, and I want to say that I sat at that dinner table with her brother. I want to tell you, I look at him, and in my mind, I'm saying, you're the man who hurt my wife. You know, you can do things to me, but don't hurt my wife. And I sat there, and I look at that, and then I turn to my wife. I turn to Cheryl, and I see her completely free. It's not holding her hostage. She's not feeling shame. She's not feeling remorse. She's not angry towards him. She's actually free from it. She's laughing. She's joking. They're talking about things that happened that were fun when they were kids. And I sit there and I think, wow, can I do that? I want to tell you, when we drive there, and it takes a few days to get to Saskatchewan for us, I'll say to her, do we really need to take your brother out? Because I have more of a trouble with it than she does. But she tells me every single time, yes, we need to take him out for dinner. Or yes, we need to take him out for lunch. Yes, we need to spend time with him. We need to show him Jesus. We need to show him a new way, a different way. And so if you're in this place and you're saying, hey, what do I do? How do I live this way? We can do it. We got to call on Jesus to say, hey, I need your help for me to be able to look at this person. I need your help so that I can be free from this person. I need your help so that I can find the freedom that I need. Not that they need, that I need. He calls us to walk in that freedom. And amazingly, when we are able to walk in that freedom, that affects other people. And other people start seeing the freedoms. And so if you're here this morning and you're saying, man, yeah, but you don't know me, I want to tell you, everybody has had people who have betrayed them. Everybody has had people who have backstabbed them. Everybody has had people who have done things wrong to us. But when we have the greatest examples of that, of people around us on how they've been able to do it and find freedom, we need to grab a hold of them and say, hey, walk with me. Be with me. You know, we have great men and women in this church, and I said this in the first service, and Pastor Paul was a great man of God, and when he first came here, I learned he wasn't very good with tools. And he asked me to come over and help him build the swing set that they had bought for their kids. And I'm one who I love kids, and I'll get them doing, and I was having kids do things, and his oldest started acting up. I want to tell you, I'm one who I like hearing a sermon, but I like watching one way more. And here's our lead pastor. He's just been hired by the church, and here he is. How is he going to act towards his children? I want to know. And he turns to his son, and he says, your behavior is not acceptable. You need to go and sit down and think about how Jesus wants you to act. And when you're ready, come and act it. And he just went on, and we just went on. And I'm sitting there, I'm wrenching away, putting the swing set. I'm saying, wow, that's not how I said to my daughter. I need to learn some more things. And then in a very short period of time, his son came down and said, where can I help? What can I do? You see, when we see how we're supposed to act and we learn how we're supposed to act towards Jesus, many men and women in these rooms will be acting that way because we want to learn to be that way. When it says forget your enemy, I tell you, love your enemy. Love those ones who have done those things to you, who have said things to you that are just so hurtful that is just about impossible to get over. But I tell you, with Jesus, anything is possible. Anything is possible. You can find freedom for everything in life. I told you that's why I asked my wife to come up. I know the freedom she has received. I know the freedom that she's been able to walk in. I know when she stopped using drugs and stopped drinking, I know the impact that it had on her life. It was a long year of struggle, of hardship, but she knew she had to work through it. She needed to find that freedom. She was my champion at that time. And if you're in that place, there's champions who want to walk with you to give you and show you that what Jesus taught them, how to love your enemy. Worship team, come on up. And as they're coming up, just think about it. This morning, we're going to be asking later the prayer team to come up. And if you're in that place of saying, hey, yeah, but you don't know my circumstance, I want to tell you, yes, we do. We will know how hard it is to say to your enemy, I love you. I love what God's doing to you. I love what's happening. More than that, how can we resolve it? Give full restitution, and so that you can walk into your fullness of what God's calling you to do. And how can I help you? It's amazing when we get to that place of being able to say to our enemies, hey, I love you, and I want to walk with you, and I want to show you what God is doing in your life. Amazing things happen. I want to tell you, that house that told us that Cheryl and I could not ever enter again, that recovery, we went back 5.5 years later, and we ran the step group for 3 years there. We started walking these men again through the recovery. And many of the men, a few of the men are here right now who went through the steps for the very first time with Cheryl and I. And I found the freedom. And if we stop and look and see this, amazingly, things will happen in our lives. We can have freedom that is beyond freedom. We can have joy beyond joy when we're called to love our enemies and pray for them. Amazingly, things can happen in our lives.